Welcome back to a Book a Day podcast. There's a book that I've been trying to cover for the last many days, but I'm only just halfway through it. As you know, the book is called The Great Moghuls, and we are trying to capture the Mughal history through this book. And as you can see, it's taking quite a lot of time for us, which is fine. Now we are at the most important step in the history. Today we are going to discuss Akbar's lifetime, who was undoubtedly the greatest Mughal emperor. And I'm going to narrate briefly what happened during his lifetime, what he was like, with the help of this book. As I said, the book is called The Great Moghuls, or alternatively, it is called A Brief History of the Great Moghuls, written by Bamber Gascoigne. And now, without any delay, let me go through the contents of Akbar's lifetime. This is the third chapter in the book. This is the third episode that we are doing in the Mughal history. And as I said, we are going to take a look at Akbar's life today. Now, let's go back to the middle of the 16th century. At that time, Humayun had just died, and the Mughal Empire was fragile. Humayun's death, we covered in the previous episode, was quite accidental. He fell down from the steps of his library and passed away in the next 3-4 days. And now, in the chaos that followed, this 13-year-old boy was declared the emperor of Mughal India. At that time, he was not in a palace, but he was in a military camp in Punjab, surrounded by soldiers, uncertainty, and enemies. So, Akbar, he was crowned with urgency. But remember, Akbar, even though he was crowned as the emperor, he was not managing at that time a lot of responsibilities. His regent, Bairam Khan, he was ruling in his name, and Bairam Khan was a very competent and very established commander. And he really did his work quite well. Now, as I said, Mughal Empire at that time was weak. Even though Humayun had conquered a large part of India, but the hold was still quite weak. The old Afghan nobility, descendants of earlier rulers like the Lodhis, they wanted their power back. And in fact, there were 3 key leaders at that point who rose separately, and each one was trying to restore Afghan dominance. But the good thing for Mughals was that they never united and they remained divided. And because of that, Mughals benefited and they remained in power. So while these Afghan rulers, they were fighting amongst themselves, another figure rose who was far more dangerous. He was Hemu. Now, let me tell you briefly about Hemu. He was not a king by birth. He was born in a Hindu family, and he began his life as a trader, a supplier, man of logistics. But as people around him soon found out, he was brilliant, he was ambitious and ruthless. And on top of everything, he was a great fighter. So, rising through the ranks of the Sur dynasty, he became the real power behind the throne. He won battle after battle. In fact, 22 consecutive battles he won. And because of the fact that he defeated Mughals repeatedly, he thought of an idea that why not I should declare myself as the king or the emperor and then rule India. And he so crowned himself as Raja Vikramaditya. And for the first time in a very long time rather, the Mughal dream stood on the edge of extinction because Hemu was really powerful. And at that point, in the middle of the 16th century, to be precise, in 1556, then takes place the second battle of Panipat. The first battle, you remember, that was when Babur changed history. This was when Akbar was going to change history. And Akbar, as I said, he was just a very young guy. But Bahram Khan, who was very competent, he led the army. And Hemu, who was more powerful, expected to win this battle. He arrived with war elephants, huge forces, and immense confidence. It was likely that he was going to win this battle. And he was winning this battle to some extent. And then something happened, something that would change the course of history. An arrow struck Hemu in the eye, and he collapsed unconscious. What used to happen in those times is, if your leader, if your king has collapsed or died or collapsed unconscious, then the army would panic and they would flee. Exactly same thing happened in this case. His army thought that he would have died, and they panicked and they fled. Hemu was captured and he was brought before young Akbar. And what they did next to Hemu was terrifying. They cut his body into two pieces, sent his head to Delhi and torso to Afghanistan, or the other way around. I am not certain about this fact, whether they sent the head to Afghanistan or torso to Delhi, one of these two. But that was quite barbaric, but quite normal also in those times. And it sent a direct message that Mughal India's power had strengthened. It had gone from strength to strength. And soon it was going to be a big empire. So that's how Akbar came to be established as the emperor. Now, as I said, Bahram Khan was ruling in Akbar's name, but Akbar was not a person who was going to be a shadow for long. By his late teens, under the influence of some relatives, he dismissed his regent and he began ruling himself. And there are quite a few interesting things we learn from this part of the book. First of all, Akbar could not read or write, or if he did so, he did it very badly. So instead, he chose not to do it. But at the same time, Akbar loved knowledge. He loved accumulating books. He also asked a writer there to write on his life, Akbarnama that is. He also listened to books being read. He surrounded himself with thinkers, poets, theologians, musicians. So all kind of activity was going on around him. As far as he was concerned, he had trained his body relentlessly into riding, wrestling, hunting. All of that was going on. So that empire was really flourishing at that time. Also, as compared to Humayun, his father, Akbar was a more strategic thinker. He did not conquer recklessly. Instead, he expanded steadily. He expanded to Malwa, Gujarat, Bengal, Rajasthan, and to each region, he adopted a different strategy. Sometimes he used force, sometimes diplomacy, and sometimes, and this would be surprising to you, he used marriage because he thought that what was more important was to build relationships, was to hold lands, not just to conquer, something that Humayun had not learned. And that was the main reason that Akbar's empire was stable. And he extended this hand of relationships and friendships to even Rajputs of Rajasthan, except one king who really resisted this temptation. That was Uday Singh. And some of you might know Uday Singh is the king after whom the city of Udaipur in Rajasthan has been named. So that was the Rajput question that Akbar could not deal, because Rajputs, as the history tells us, they were proud martial race and they were fiercely independent. Of course, some of them had already allied with Akbar, but Uday Singh, as I said, he had resisted. He had chosen the path of resistance. Now, Akbar marched against Chittor, the fortress of Mewar where Uday Singh ruled. This siege was long, brutal, and also symbolic. Chittor represented Rajput honor. What happened there was eventually Raja Uday Singh abandoned his force and he went to the city which later came to be known as Udaipur, and because of which many thousands of Rajput warriors they fell, and many women they committed johar. Johar is a ritual way of self-immolation, self-killing, rather than getting captured by the enemy. A lot of women committed this during the Rajput era. So Akbar was is eventually victorious there, but he was disturbed. So after this battle, you would find that his policy softened. He realized that terror alone or conquest alone could not build a lasting empire. And he began choosing alliance over annihilation. In fact, this led to something more interesting in the times of Akbar, where he conducted a great experiment of religious harmony and he practiced tolerance. What happened really was, after some time, Akbar began asking questions, and some of those questions were really dangerous considering the religious fundamentalism used to be prevalent in those times. So he asked questions like why must an empire follow only one religion? Why must belief divide rather than unite? And he softened his approach towards other religions. He abolished the jizya tax, which was there on non Muslims. Then he invited scholars of all faiths like Hindus or other sects of Islam, Jains, Christians, even Zoroastrians, and all of that to have debate in his court. He listened, he raised his doubts, he questioned, and of course, as I said, marriage was part of his strategy, so he married women of different religions and allowed them to practice their faith. And that was a big change in Akbar's time compared to what had been before him. But Akbar went even a step further. He created a religion, a path of his own, a spiritual path that combined ethical ideas from many different traditions: Hinduism, Islam, Jainism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and it was called Deen-e-Ilahi, religion of God. This was not really a religion, but this was more like an approach, I would say. It had no scripture, no mass following, only a few close disciples where they discussed, argued, and debated. But as a belief system, which Akbar thought that it would become, it failed because it cannot be spread among the masses, and it remained a very closed kind of a cult. But the consequences were there to see. As I said, the policy of tolerance was there, and different communities were coming together and they were flourishing. And then in his later years, Akbar grew quieter. A lot of rebellions were going around him, especially from his own sons. His favorite son, Salim, who came to be known as Jahangir, rebelled openly, and he was a drunkard, alcoholic. Another son, in fact, drank himself into ruin. So, power did not protect him from grief. He had built an empire, but most of the other Mughal emperors, he could not build peace in his own house. And then, at the beginning of the 17th century, in 1605, he died. He died as a man who tried, who had been brave in his battles, but who has also been tolerant to make power humane. So that was the life and times of Akbar, and I hope you would have learned quite a few things here. Thank you very much for listening. I will catch you the next time. Thank you.